The numbering, as the historians prefer to call it, happened 52 years ago on July 7th, 2024 at 1:16 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time. It wasn't really anything special. Suddenly, everyone in the world just looked down and saw a number. Quickly after, scientists figured out the numbers followed rules. Number 1. Each person, no matter what, had a different number, and the largest at the time recorded was 7,574,299,371. Number 2. When someone died, their number would disappear and immediately reappear onto a newborn somewhere in the world. Children were always born with numbers. Number 3. A rare phenomenon that was observed was called a renumbering. When someone kills another, the murderer gains the number of the deceased. Number 4. The numbers are unremovable. Every method has been tried, including amputation. Number 5. There has never been a recorded person with the number 1. Since the numbers appeared, the world's class order was rearranged. There soon was a literal 1%. The impoverished with low numbers became aristocrats overnight. Billionaires that got branded with numbers above 100,000 were ostracized from their own society. The lower numbers took power in every country. The current man with the number 2 became the President of the United States at the age of 24. Discrimination ran rampant, renumberings among the higher numbers commonplace. The lowers never had to worry. They could afford top-of-the-line security at all times. The only mystery that remained unsolved, besides why the numbering happened in the first place, was the apparent non-existence of the number 1. Each baby born since the numbering was checked to no avail. A cult, called the Brotherhood of I, dedicated to the worship of the mythical number 1, grew, until the world was divided further into 2 categories: those who sought the number 1 as a god to protect, or as a blessing to kill for the purpose of renumbering. I myself hoped there would never be a number 1, but my hopes were misplaced. Number 1 was a little girl named Sophia, and born to my sister. As soon as she was born, the personnel in the room, all Brotherhood members, kept us on lockdown for 2 months, not letting anyone in or out while they protected Sophia. But even still, boats leak, and she was discovered. I escaped with my niece at the insistence of my sister, who had still not recovered from childbirth. I'm certain that she's dead now. We were living on our own in the sparsely populated regions of Oregon, but I was tired of having a living target on my back. Sophia was no blessing, she was a curse. The number 1 is a curse. But I couldn't kill her. I didn't want her number. So I left her, alone. 2.5 months old, unable to sit up by herself. I hoped an animal would take care of her. I hoped it wouldn't count as my fault. I misplaced my hopes again, because the number 1 just appeared on my arm. Up until 6 months ago, my favourite neighbours had been the Gradys. Both retired and both elderly for as long as I can remember, everyone agreed they were the heart and soul of the neighbourhood. Him with his award-winning garden, and her with her blue ribbon soups, stews and pastries. The two complemented each other perfectly. With the sweetest fruits and the crispiest vegetables he grew going into all her food. Every year they won every garden and food competition you can imagine. And every year they were always asked what was the secret of their success. And they would always smile and answer that they simply put a lot of heart and soul into everything. But it wasn't just their amazing garden and delicious food that made them the best neighbours. They played grandparents to everyone. Like Mrs. Bryan, to whom they brought a strawberry peach pie and a shoulder to cry on after her husband left her one night and never came back. Or the O'Learys, who received a beef and vegetable stew and sympathies after their daughter ran away with her boyfriend, and they hadn't heard from her since. Yes, sir. Pillars of the community. That's what the Gradys were. But all of that changed 6 months ago, when no one had seen them for several days, and the newspapers and mail began piling up. Fearing the worst, and with all the doors and windows locked and no way to get inside, the neighbours called the police. Within 30 minutes, a door was broken in and the Gradys were found in their bed, and in a state of decomposition. It was later determined that Mr. Grady had died in his sleep, and Mrs. Grady, apparently not wanting to live without him, had taken a deadly poison and laid down next to her husband one last time. It would have been a bittersweet and almost romantic ending for them, had it not been for what the police would find in their basement. A giant freezer full of human organs and tissues that were cut up to be put in the soups and stews. A container full of lard rendered from human fat that was what made the cookies and pie crust so flaky. Bones that were either used for stock or ground into bone meal and mixed with the garden soil. And the blood? Mr. Grady believed it made a good plant fertilizer additive. DNA testing would later reveal the true fate of Mr. Bryan and the O'Leary's daughter, even her boyfriend. Mr. and Mrs. Grady had always said they put a lot of heart and soul into their work, and evidently, everything else as well. "You can hit me, but don't you ever lay a hand on my kids," she would tell him. This was a rule made very clear to both us kids and my father from a very young age. Our family was a small one, with Mum, Dad, me, 13 years old, and my two younger brothers, 11 and 7 respectively. We got along sort of okay, with that honest strain that looked over us like a dark cloud. My parents were an arranged marriage, and it showed. They never much liked each other. That much was made obvious from how they treated themselves and each other. Through all that, she kept one rule firm on him. "You can hit me, but don't you ever lay a hand on my kids." For the longest time, it seemed like my father obeyed this rule. From my point of view, he did. Maybe because he thought I would immediately go to my mother and snitch on him, if he ever did. Maybe because he didn't want to break the rule. Whatever the reason was, he always seemed to keep the peace whenever me and my mum were around. One day, my mum took me out to go shopping for my birthday. I got a Hot Topic gift card from my aunt, and my mum took me to the mall to use it. We were out most of the day and had a grand time. We came home around 7ish, and from the open car window I heard the sounds of my youngest brother crying and my dad yelling. Mother told me to stay in the car. She went inside and quickly went silent. Soon my mum came back outside, now holding my sobbing brother with what looked like blood on her cheek. I asked what was wrong, and she told me she just nicked her cheek on a piece of glass. She put my brother in the car with me and quickly went back inside. I heard the sounds of an obvious struggle, then silence again. Hours later I awoke, and a police officer was knocking on the car window. "Are you two hurt?" he asked. My brother beckoned to his arm, which I then noticed was bent the wrong way. The officer opened the car door and brought my brother to an awaiting ambulance, where they began to help him out. The officer then filled me in on what they knew so far. Mum had attacked Dad and was last seen chasing him into the nearby woods. A concerned neighbour called the cops when they noticed me and my brother in a car alone for such a long time. Me and my brother were brought to stay with my grandma, which is where we are now. A few weeks later, they located my father's body. It had been bludgeoned to death with a large tree branch, which was found a few hundred feet away. My mum is still on the run to this day.